Welcome, everyone, to the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Strategy Workshop. I'm your host, Julie Kratz. We'll be spending the next hour together unpacking what a good strategy looks like and how to build that in your organization. A bit about me, if you have yet to meet me, this is our first experience or time working together. I'm an author, a speaker, and a trainer focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. I've written some books. I spent some time in corporate America for 12 years as a people leader, and I remember the challenges of leading inclusively. I remember how much I didn't see myself reflected in the walls of the organization. Certainly, the higher you went up, the worse it got. And from that, really started my business 6 years ago with the intent to help everyone feel seen, heard, and a sense of belonging in the workplace. My latest book, Lead Like an Ally, is about a journey through corporate America with strategies to facilitate inclusion. And actually, the last chapter is what this content is modeled off of. I wrote this actually for anybody that's written a book, it takes some time. I wrote this last year, way before the events of this summer, and certainly before this pandemic that we're upon. Little did I know how relevant this would be and how important it is for everyone to be included in the diversity, equity, and inclusion conversation. I think what we're seeing right now is a heightened conversation certainly about race and white people being curious on how to be allies. Many corporations saying, oh shoot, we did this statement, we donated money, we said we were going to do all these things this year, and now it's September, what do we do, right? And so if that's you, or you're still struggling with the how piece of diversity, equity, inclusion, we'll talk through how to do that today. And that book is really helpful guide with a manager toolkit to help people unpack this further. I did have the chance before all of this in February to do a live TEDx event. Maybe one of the last times I spoke on stage, maybe for a while, sadly, but I'm so thankful for that experience and talking about belonging in the workplace and my own gender identity and how I wrestled with that. But certainly there's so many lenses of diversity. Being a white person in this space, I'm very well aware of my privilege that I bring to the conversation, but I also have realized over the last 6 years in these conversations how much more intersectional these lenses are, and to isolate gender and race and ethnicity and disabilities or LGBTQ plus is really doing a disservice to the whole group. We're stronger together. We're stronger as allies together. We engage everyone in the conversation. So that's a bit about me and my background. I see a lot of people introducing themselves in the chat. I invite you to continue to do that. If you joined late, tell us who you are, why you're here, and get the opportunity to connect with folks that you may not have met yet. You can do that privately or on LinkedIn or social media, wherever you choose. So the key parts that we're going to talk about today before we go into some breakout rooms to kind of talk about what you learned from the pre-work. I did share a short article link. If you had a chance to read it, great. If not, you're not in trouble. Hopefully your breakout room will get you up to speed. I'm going to do my best to get you up to speed with what we're talking about today. So what we're talking about today with D&I strategy or DEI strategy, D stands for diversity, E stands for equity, I stands for inclusion. Sometimes you'll see a B in there, which stands for belonging. We don't do this to make things complicated. We're doing this because all these words really do matter, that all of these themes come together when we talk about inclusion in the workplace. It's really difficult to achieve diversity if we don't have inclusion. It's really hard to achieve inclusion if we don't have belonging. It's really hard without equity. So all of these mishmash together. Now, when we're thinking about it strategically, no matter how you define the acronym at your organization, it's really irrelevant. I think the three things that are most important for a strategy, the three things that are on the slide, is having a clearly defined what. Okay, so what do you mean by diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, if that's how you've defined it? So whatever words you've picked, whatever hanger, talk about as the umbrella, whatever you've chosen as the architecture around diversity and inclusion, what does it mean to you? Okay, and I have a diversity dictionary I often share with folks of what these terms mean to me. but I am not the official owner of this diversity dictionary. In fact, it's always changing. And that's what I love about this work. It's complex, it's got its nuances. We're constantly learning and it's evolving, which is great. It also makes it complicated. So what does it mean? And so when I ask organizations, when I'm working with them up front, it helps me understand, to meet them where they're at. Where are you right now? How have you defined it? Because with anything that we're doing that's important to our business, we would have a strategy for it. We would have a definition for it. It is shocking to me how few organizations have taken the time to do the same with their diversity, equity, inclusion strategy. So that's the first piece you're seeing, the purple bubble there. The what. What does it mean? So we're going to do some exercises to go through to help you understand if that's something that's missing currently in your DEI strategy. I'll explain more on how to do that. The why. And I would venture to say, with my clients and organizations that I'm working with, not the ones that are like light years ahead on this, but most small to medium sized companies and large organizations that aren't quite where they want to be, diversity, equity, inclusion, which is the majority. I would say 80%, the challenge is that they don't have a why for it. I truly believe with anything that's important to your business, you have to have a strong why, and it's usually an emotional tie to the strategy. So it looks something like this. Like, what if we do nothing for this? Like, what if we made an announcement this summer, a donation, we did this exercise, training, all hands meeting, whatever, we do nothing else? What happens? And I love pressure testing this question kind of facetiously to poke and say, does it really matter? Like, does it really matter? I, of course, believe it matters, but do you believe it matters? And this actually is the leadership team at the top, right? Do they all have a strong why, an emotional connection to diversity, equity, inclusion? Or is it kind of like, oh, this is the right thing to do. It's really good for humans. We want to be more relevant to our customers. Yes. And I would challenge you to go deeper than that. So the why, the compelling human case, there is a business case, of course, that I'll share with you, but oftentimes it's the human case, digging deep on this. And I'll give you some examples later. And then the how. So the how, unfortunately, is where most organizations are focused. Okay, we're going to do this, 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 and this. Like it's a sprint, like we're going to catch up. We're behind, so we're just going to run until we get there. The temptation to do that is real. I would hesitate to jump to the how without having a solid what we're trying to do here and then why we're trying to do it before going to the how. It's a bit like jumping in a race that's already started, okay, to use that analogy a little further. And you're going to make a lot more missteps when you haven't fully defined it and put that business and human case around it. So there is a natural cascade and flow to this. And the how piece is really the blocking and tackling. When I lead these sessions with my clients, we spend a lot more time on the what and the why than the how. The how, honestly, can be answered in like 20 minutes or an hour-long action planning session, depending on how deep we want to get with the action plans. How's easy. That's why we go right to the how. But unless we have the what and the why, the how is much harder to implement. It's harder to resource. So it usually looks like the DEI person or council inside the organization that has no money and no extra time, do this and your day job, which many of you, that may resonate with you. And it's just not going to work. What ends up happening is these initiatives, especially when they're called initiatives, they tend to be short-term, burnout. People get compassion fatigue, which if anyone's experiencing that now, very fair. I myself have to put that oxygen mask back on from time to time and take a break from this work, just for a couple hours. Don't worry, not for a long time. But there is an exhaustion factor that comes. And if you ask any people of color how exhausted they're feeling right now with everything that's happened this year and continuing to happen, that struggle is real. So when you get into this work, having an intentional how, talking about an intentional, consistent set of events and programs and awareness, almost 80% of the how is usually education. It's training. People don't know what they don't know. but it has to be done over time. It can't be a one and done check the box exercise. So if you read the pre-read article, you probably got all of that. I just reinforced it. So I got y'all up to speed with the Cliff Notes version. You do have the workbook that I've put in the chat box, as well as the calendar invite and sent with to you if you registered early via email. So hopefully you can get your hands on that. What I want to do now is send you to a breakout room to just talk about one thing you learned from reading that article or from what I just shared on the what, why, and the how. So what was one kind of takeaway as you think about these cascade of questions of what diversity, equity, inclusion mean, why they matter, and then how are we going to intentionally commit to diversity, equity, and inclusion? So that's the exercise. It's page 1 of your workbook. That first question, just to take note of, what is your takeaway from this conversation? And I'm giving you about 5 minutes. I'm going to put you in groups that are, as soon as I can find it, are 2 to 3. So it's not going to be too large of a group. So hopefully you have, everyone has a chance to share. And I'll give you 5 minutes and then I'll give you a warning to come back and join us in the larger group. And I'd love for some folks to share kind of, if you can nominate somebody to share back with the group what y'all discussed. So the question for you is, it's in the first page of your workbook. What was a key takeaway you had from the article or from what I just shared in this framework around the what, the why, and the how? All right, I'll see you back soon. Michelle, oh, there you go.
At Lockheed Martin. And when I thought about the why, it was like, oh, for talent reasons, for customer reasons. And, I thought the other thing important to be my passion, but I never really thought it's important to bring that into the conversation. So that's what got to me. And Nate, how do these business leaders feel when you say why? Are they like, no, let's just get down to business?
Yeah, some are very much about the bottom dollar and how it's going to impact and what the investment means. But luckily, our 2 owners are the ones that I initially talked to before the position became a reality, and they were very invested in that reason behind it. So
I'm working, hi Julie.
I'm just saying hi.
When I'm working with clients, sometimes they even find it difficult to find diverse talent because the people who are doing the interviewing and the selection are not in tune with what that really means. And we like people who are like ourselves. Like if I can connect with somebody emotionally, I'm like, that's awesome. I want to hire that person. And it may be because we have such varied differences and experiences, it's sometimes difficult for a bunch of white
that you're dealing with that, you'll never do anything. So for you to have that piece of belonging, it's the way you're managing people and your talent processes. Mm-hmm. Hi, Julie.
Hi, Julie. Just saying hi, making sure everybody has what they need.
Yeah, there's this interesting, I was reading about, have you heard of the broken rung on the ladder? It's about essentially, you know, you can promote individuals, but the reason why most often the highest level of leadership is very homogenous. Isn't that the right word?
It could be a good word, yes.
Yeah. I'm working on my
Your diversity dictionary is strong.
Is because individuals will get to that lower mid-management and they don't progress up.
Yeah.
And that's the broken rung. It's like you can't climb the ladder if there's a broken rung that you can't get above. But Julie, I was sharing that I didn't realize there was a B in these acronyms.
Yeah, some people add the B. It's dibs sometime. I try not to overcomplicate things. So
I know, Julie, I have to say, like, it's funny. I've been working in this space for a little bit, but my challenge with people is they're obsessing over words.
I know.
Right? Like, I am Latina, but yes, Latinx means it's gender neutral, right? So I just was like, don't obsess so much about the words. I was like, I really just need you to behave well at work. I was like, let's focus on your behavior over this obsession over words, and like, let's keep it simple, but think more about behaviors, and then ask people how they would like to be, you know, described.
That's the important piece. Mm-hmm. You can always ask.
Much more. It's so fascinating.
I think words do matter, but I don't think there's a certain word that you have to use, right? So I never argue to put the E in or the B in. D and I is just fine. If that works for you, that's whatever works for you. The challenge is when we add more definitions in the majority group, that's when they start to throw up their hands like, oh, this is so complicated. I can't understand, which is a form of privilege, not having to understand.
Right.
But there's a middle ground. I know what you're saying, Natalia.
Yeah, I just, like, my CEO was driving me nuts the other day. I was like, don't worry so much about whether it's Latinx, and don't correct other people for saying Hispanic or Latinos, because, you know, it just sounds like you are acting like you know everything, right?
Right.
And we can't hear you.
I'm gonna jump on and make sure the other rooms are good. We got just another minute. See ya.
Julie?
Hey.
Hi. Can you hear me?
I can.
I don't know. I was having problems inside my break room. Like, I don't think no one could hear me. And I was like,
just in your room. Sorry about that. Sometimes that happens. We're getting ready to wrap up. Actually, okay. I'm gonna send everybody back. So
no problem. Okay.
Apologies on that.
No problem.
Hopefully you were able to hear.
I heard a little bit.
Okay, they'll be back in just a minute. All right, I think everybody's coming back now. So I put the workbook in the chat one more time. I think if anybody joined late, you can't access the chat before you join for some reason on Zoom. Wish I could do something about that. But the workbook's...
Okay.
I'm going to ask everybody, I'm going to mute everybody as you come back. I think it auto defaults to unmuting everybody. Gotta love those breakout rooms, but it does throw a wrench in logistics. So thanks everybody for coming back. Who wants to share a takeaway they had from their group? And for those of you who are on video or audio, and if you want to share live, that's great as well. The PowerPoint is the workbook. Yes. Venta. Yes. So it is a PowerPoint file, so you can just type right into it. I also recommend printing it and writing things down, whether it's during the session, if you can still do that, or definitely after the session. It's really helpful. When we put pen to paper, our commitment level goes up. So I always like to recommend that. Who wants to share something they learned from their group?
I can share. I was chatting with Natalia, who put some good insight into that. I didn't realize there was a B. And it makes so much sense when she started talking through it. And even we were kind of laughing about that the order is never right, you know, with the acronyms. And it was really insightful to learn about the B, because it makes so much sense, and it definitely obviously belongs there.
Belonging belongs.
Yeah, A. But it was really interesting. So I've already learned something.
Awesome. Awesome. I know there was some like, oh gosh, all these words, and it gets complicated in the language around this. Yes. I'll give you a quick crash course in the diversity dictionary terms here in a minute. And words matter. And in this space, I think we just have to be really careful the dance we do with the majority group. And when I say majority group, I generally mean white, male, cisgender, straight, which I'll explain in a minute. They're mostly the leaders of most corporations. So it's not, sometimes the reaction I get is like, throw up their hands like, oh gosh, I can't understand all this stuff. Yes, you can. And that is a form of privilege, not having to understand. But the words we use matter. And so when we define it up front and get everybody aligned on it, that's part of the magic of, oh, this is what we mean by diversity and inclusion. Because what diversity and inclusion used to mean was EEO, equal opportunity employment. It used to mean affirmative action inside organizations. It used to mean harassment training. So just for context around some of the stigma around diversity and inclusion, we want to let go of the past stigmas, bring in new language that's more inclusive, that signals belonging, equity, diversity, inclusion. So that's why the what is so important. And then of course the why. I heard some other conversations about the business case, really get your company fired up about it. I'll share some data on that. There is no shortage of data. I'm exhausted by having to share this data, but it's important for number-driven company. But there's also a human case, right? Why do we really care about this? And I'll share some emotional language that I think is much more compelling to craft around that why. Anyone else want to share? Any other thoughts?
I'll share the why. I actually have Simon's book right here on my bookshelf, so that really resonates.
Start with the why.
Start with the why. And just the overall connection to emotional intelligence. It's okay to be human. It's okay to talk about our feelings and why these things are important to us as people. I shared with our group, Matt and Michelle, we were going through Julie's 5-part training series. A little plug for you, Julie. It is phenomenal. And one of the things that really stood out strong was how important the different training sessions were to people within our organization. It was a surprise to see the chat, just scrolling through it and hearing from people that we were least expecting to hear from. That in itself goes to show, okay, this is why we're doing this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you have a lot of white males in your organization. And you're right. They're so intrigued. I don't know what I don't know. Right. Wow. I'm learning more about human beings and gender expression and sexual orientation and race than I ever knew in a safe place. So I think when we get this document together, and Christina's done a great job of crafting that strategically, then people see themselves as a part of it rather than diversities for other people. So I think that's part of the magic too. So thanks for bringing that to life, Christina. And it is, we make decisions emotionally and justify them rationally. So the why is the emotion piece. Okay, we're going to dig in more to that. One thing I like to share, this is a trick you can take with you if you want to lead this conversation with your leadership team. I recommend kind of having a group of I facilitated this exercise with as many as 25 people and as few as 12. So there's no right or wrong size. I will say when you're getting people together to craft the strategy, The leadership team is obviously very important. The D&I council or committee or whoever you have is probably really important too. I've done a bottoms up approach or a top down approach, whatever fits your culture. Again, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but getting the right people in the room to craft this and collaborate on it is important. This isn't one person's job to write. So I like to use rules of engagement. When I'm getting people together in the Zoom world, I like to start with these three. Feel free to borrow these three. Feel free to make them your own, whatever your cultural norms are. Maybe you have values that you can share to tee it up. We want to hear from everybody. So I always say everyone has to speak up, and that can actually be saying, I don't know, or I'm good, right? You don't have to put somebody on the spot, because there are processors that don't want to always speak up in a live setting that you might circle back with afterwards. In a conversation around diversity, equity, inclusion strategy, I always say we want honesty. It's not about us saying like, we're awesome, or, oh, we're a lot better than we were in 1980. Like, that just ticks people off that are like, really, is that the benchmark we're going for, right? So this isn't about being good. This isn't about pretending that we've got this figured out. This is actually about being vulnerable, and we want to get better. That's why we're here. And if that just like lets the gas out of the room of like, oh, okay, finally we can be real with each other. So modeling that as a facilitator, being vulnerable, I try to share something really hard about myself at the beginning of the conversation to set the tone for vulnerability and trust that's needed. And then this is a brave place to be your full self. I used to safe place, and people like to say safe place when we're defining diversity. I always think of the bathroom sign around safe place, and it's not the feeling I'm trying to create with diversity. But brave place to me, courageous place. A lot of my clients use the candid place. Whatever it is, we want this to be inclusive for everyone. That means we need to respect each other. So that's a really important ground rule to tee up to, is respect in that brave place. So feel free to try these on, use your own cultural norms, values, but I always like to say that, and that these rules apply for our conversation. Crash course on the diversity dictionary, and this is something I have on my website. If you're interested, you can download this. There's 20 different terms, but for the course of our conversation today, I just wanted to share a couple of them, because y'all mentioned the acronym. I didn't know B was in there, or E was in there. D is almost always in there, right? We're talking about diversity. Its most simplistic definition, I define it as different groups of people. And it is important, words matter here. So we don't want to call someone diverse. So we never want to call a person diverse. We'd want to say diverse talent or diverse groups of people. Generally speaking, when we're talking about diversity, these are the big five: gender, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, abilities, okay? LGBTQ is the acronym a lot of times that gets used for gender identity as well as sexual orientation. Okay, that is an acronym that encompasses both of those, but they are not correlated, and they just happen to live in the same acronym. And I think sometimes people put those together when they do not explicitly belong together. But most organizations, gender and race, optics, visible differences is the key. Just remember, there's other areas of diversity, and there's way more areas beyond this. For the simplicity of today, I'm only going to cover the big five. That means the people that we really want in the room, honestly, is the majority group, the group that holds the largest amount of power in society and workplaces. So 92% of CEOs are white males of Fortune 500 companies. So if that is the case for you, I always joke when I ask somebody about their CEO, I'm like 92% of the time I have a good guess of guessing it's a white guy, and usually a straight guy, usually cisgender, usually able-bodied, not always. I don't have data on all that. I would venture to say it's probably still north of 90%. These are the folks that make decisions today. And if we don't have them engaged in the conversation, how are we going to get anywhere? And I don't love that this is where we're at. I'm not justifying that we have to get the white man involved, but I think we're going to move a lot quicker if we do. And historically, with women's rights, with racial equity, with civil rights, we haven't done the best job of getting our allies engaged, understandably so. They mess up, they slip up, and they say and do the wrong thing from time to time. And practicing some grace and forgiveness is okay. But think about how you can get the majority group in your organization involved. Now, when you think about inclusion, I often use the word inclusion and belonging together, a sense of belonging for diverse groups of people. Okay, so racial identities, gender identities all feel welcome. seen, heard, belong at our organization. Now, underrepresented groups, just another term for the dictionary, those that are opposite of the majority group. So you might be thinking, I know there's a lot of women here. That is one form of being underrepresented just by default of who's at the top of most organizations, not all, but most. So if you identify as a woman, non-white, LGBTQ+, gender non-binary, which means you don't exclusively identify as male or female, those pronouns are they or them, and then disability, okay? So if you identify with any one of those factors, that's one area perhaps where you're underrepresented. If you have two, that's intersectionality, okay? And that can be race and gender. That can also be other threads like LGBTQ and disability, for example. Now, equity, has anyone seen this diagram? There's like 12,000 different versions. I like this one. I don't know why. There's a race one that's a bit better. I like this one because the fence goes away. So in this analogy, the fence is the systemic barrier. And I think all of us know there are systemic barriers in gender, race, all of these identities, and diversity. First image is equality. We're just giving everybody the same support over the same systemic barrier, right? So it's like, oh, we gave everyone a pay raise. We have everyone access to this thing. Well, not everyone needs that, right? So equity is giving people what they need to see over the systemic barrier. And then in the third picture, of course, we want to get rid of the systemic barrier, which we are a bit away from. But the middle ground here, the argument for equity is that we do have different levers we can pull for people that may not see themselves reflected in the organization, may not have access to the same types of resources that are part of the underrepresented group. We want to give different supports, and that is what equity is about versus equality. So if you see that term, that's what equity means, and that's why it's different than equality. Okay, so I'm going to pause there. Questions on the diversity dictionary? I see the chat has been quiet. I'm going to lead you through the three-part exercise now. So I'm going to spend about the next 10 minutes going through how I facilitate the what, the why, and the how. You can use your workbook to follow along and take notes on what you think that looks like at your organization. Again, I will be providing the recording, so you'll be able to see some case study examples that I'm going to share with you, some ideas and some starting points, because I think sometimes we don't know what language to use or really even how to generate this conversation. So I always like to start again with those kind of rules of engagement up front that I shared with you, give people a crash course in kind of like diversity and what these terms mean, and then ask them, what do you think it means to us? So at our organization, what do you think it means to us is the first question I ask. I often share this in advance of the conversation. So if you're looking to facilitate this with your leadership team or with your D&I committee or council, I might suggest that you send this question in advance or send my workbook in advance. Feel free to use that workbook however you'd like. You paid to be a part of this. That is your workbook, however you'd like to use it. But give people a chance to process it, because when I put people on the spot with this question, they're like, I don't know, I'm so afraid of saying or doing the wrong thing, especially in a group. So what I do is I usually have people chat their answers, come prepared to discuss, share some thoughts. And generally speaking, once people share a couple of things, it just springboards from there. And then set the tone that you want to hear from everybody, because we want to be inclusive, right? Watch out for the person that dominates the conversation. That's the opposite of what we're trying to create with inclusion. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions so far, so you tell me to stop if I'm going too fast. So this is the first question, what? And these are examples. So I facilitated this exercise a dozen or so times this summer in light of everything that's been going on. And these are probably the most common things I hear. These are not right answers. There are no wrong answers. This could reflect your organization or not. So take it or leave it. I am not arguing for these. I just simply want to give you some language as examples of places the conversation might start for you. So if I were to ask you and your leaders at your organization, what does diversity, equity, inclusion mean to us? Some of you might put B in there for belonging. Some of you might take equity out if it's just diversity and inclusion. Some of you might swap inclusion before diversity. All of those are fair. But you might answer that question with a brave place to be ourselves, right? I've used that language before, and sometimes people gravitate towards that. The sense of belonging factor, if belonging is not in that acronym. I usually hear something about a deep commitment. Again, there's intentionality, there's a commitment usually to an ongoing journey around diversity, or appreciation of differences. And so these are somewhat fundamental and basic, but also language that we can use to craft. So in an exercise like this, what I would do is fill up a whole slide of sentence fragments like this. And after about 10 minutes of brainstorming, what I would do is ask everyone to pick their favorite one or two. If they really can't decide, they can pick two. And then I highlight them in yellow and I move them up to the top, and we actually vote on the ones we like the most. So there'd be a lot more on this list in a real brainstorming activity. And then we would want to prioritize them. After the exercise, I would then take those highlighted words and start to craft a sentence around it. Language is important. Having language for this is important. I like to think about kind of 3 key bullet points. You know, if I'm asked in a dead sleep, what does diversity and inclusion mean at your organization? Could people have the language? Could they go into autopilot a little bit and remember, oh yeah, it's about belonging. Oh yeah, it's about commitment, that kind of thing. We don't have to remember the whole statement, but we do want to remember some key parts of it. So that's why it's important to kind of actively brainstorm a long list, then prioritize it. As a facilitator, that's the art of facilitation. Facilitate literally means to make easy for people, and this is hard. So crafting a statement can be hard. Getting all the ideas out there, prioritizing them, and then my advice, wordsmith on your own afterwards and then put it in front of people. It is not a good use of people's time to be editing commas and ands and theys. I personally detest that. And it frustrates people. So take it offline. I always say, this is 80% of what I need. I'm going to get it back in front of you. It's iterative. Now, if you want to see the finished product of some of this work, here's 2 examples from 2 clients I'm working with. And this is a long example. This is a more concise example. So we're a diverse and inclusive environment committed to providing equitable access to job opportunities, career growth, and equal pay for equal work. We are an empathetic community that is equally empowered regardless of position. We all feel respected and safe being 100% our authentic selves. What's interesting about this example is, again, we brainstormed a huge long list of stuff, and this was all the stuff that they wanted in the statement, but it's also somewhat aspirational. So I asked them, could you say this is true today? And they said, this part, not so much. And we don't actually know yet about equal pay for equal work. So that's okay. It's okay if there's some elements that are aspirational in your statement, because if you don't put a line in the sand, you're never going to get there. So this is a little bit, the what question is a little bit of who we are now and who we aspire to be. Okay, what it means to us really gets at both of those things. The alternative over here that's a little more concise, we're intentionally cultivating an environment where differences are celebrated and everyone feels understood, respected, and heard. I personally like how short and like to the point it is and succinct. The leadership team worked on this, and they then chose to bring this language to the rest of the organization and iterate and get feedback on it. This was actually done by all employees at a small organization I worked with that really wanted all that language in there. So different ways to get there, different styles, different priorities. I just wanted you to juxtapose the 2 and kind of see some options there. So check-in, questions. Roma, will we get copies of the slides? Absolutely. I'll have to PDF them to you. In the recording you'll get as well. So I'll send a follow-up note to everybody today with the workbook again, in case you can't find it, the slides and the recording. And I'll put the diversity dictionary in there too. I think that's a good one to tee up the conversation. Other questions on this? The what exercise, how to do it, some examples, some language you might use.
I would just add that I like the second example from one of your clients, Julie. To me, the first one, while it sounds good, it sounds like all the rest a little bit, and it feels more like truly a corporate statement versus hearing and coming from the people. That's my personal opinion.
Yeah. Well, and think about your culture. I mean, what Christina's saying is fair. I mean, think about who you are as a culture. Are we formal? Are we informal? Do we want the corporate everything? Do we really just want the succinct bullet points? I think pressure testing it as a facilitator, if you're a leader of this conversation or prepping a leadership team for this, I like to say, can you remember this? Right? Because those mission statements from like the 1990s that lived on, I remember they were like all over the walls and everyone's like, what are they again? It's on our website somewhere. Not helpful. Can we remember this? And like, is this who we really are? And then the question I love to ask is, if your neighbor were to ask casually, like, tell me about diversity and inclusion at your company. Not that someone would do that. I might, but most people probably don't do this in casual conversation. But just say your kid was going to ask you about it. Somebody, could you explain it simply in a way? So however your statement ends up being, it has to be simply lived and said. Okay. Otherwise, there's no point to creating this language if we're not going to live the experiences that align with the statement. Kristen,
I think one of the things that I really like about the statement, though, is that even in our small group, we talked about it, is that it should include some statement that everyone.
Yeah.
So not just leaving, different groups here and there, but really making the statement that everyone comes in, no matter who they are, no matter which group they belong to.
Yeah, it's inclusive. Everyone. I mean, I read these and I'm like, I want to work for these places. I see myself reflected in that. Thanks, Alina. Kristen, did you find people struggled with this part? Yeah, Kirsten. Yes. Was someone going to ask something? I thought I heard feedback. So it's, yes, people do struggle with this. So again, share the question in advance of a real conversation. You don't have to do this all together, right? So I told you a small organization, all employees did this with me. So a leadership team of a few hundred employees did this one with me. I've had focus groups where we gather the nuggets and then put it together before. I've done one-on-ones with leadership teams to do this, to craft it. Choose your own adventure, do what's going to work best. I like to send these 3 questions in advance and say, come prepared to discuss these 3 things. You'd be surprised how much people want to participate. Like Christina was saying, people will jump in and participate when they feel their voice is being heard. Give them some time to process it though, because they don't think about D&I all the time like you might. They need some time to marinate and think on it. So thought questions in advance for sure, I recommend. Now the why piece, there is a business case, and I know several of you said my company's interested. This is where we're at. Totally fine. I don't care how you get there as long as you get there. 3 key stats that come from Harvard Business Review, Forbes, and the Pew Research Center at McKinsey: 87% better decisions, 19% higher revenues, 20 to 35% higher profitability, depending if you're measuring gender and or race. This stuff is real. It has been measured for decades. There is no shortage of content. I have, knock on wood, never found a study that shows the opposite. What kind of business case can you create for something else in your business like this? Like this is really remarkable. So if you want a case study, go to Harvard, Harvard Business Review /diversity, and you can find an article and share with your leadership team if you want backing on this. It's not difficult. So I like to share that with people. Then I like to say, but there's a human case for this. So why is it really important to us? Why is diversity, equity, inclusion important to us? Now, just like the last question, I would have sent this in advance of a real life conversation or a focus group or one-on-one, whatever you're doing, however you're doing it. And then I would kind of pepper in some examples. Not to say that this is where you should go, but this might be a starting point if people really can't get the gears turning. It's a source of growth, right? How are we going to grow? Perhaps with different demographics, right? Mirroring our future customers. That's one of my personal favorites. Asking the team, who do we want to do business with? Who is our community that we want to engage with? Do we look like them at the top of the organization? Do we behave like them? Do we reflect them? Do we mirror them? Probably not. Opportunity. Are we representative of the communities that we do business with? Probably not. Innovation, right? We know that data from that. So you can bring in any one of these. These are the common ones I hear. Matt said, do you want to recommend any specific article from HBR? There's so many, Matt. I struggle with the right one. Honestly, they publish diversity articles daily now, if not weekly. So I have a subscription and I go in from time to time and pull ones. You can get the daily alert for free and get up to 4 downloads a month for free. And they make their coronavirus content free now too. So I'd recommend just signing up for the daily alert and going in there and finding stuff on their diversity page. but they're very kind to share for a month for free. So now I don't have a favorite article. There was one that was written back in like 2008 that was really groundbreaking for this. Why diversity and inclusion is important for your business, I think was the title of it. But there's so many, there's no shortage. So you find the one that speaks to you and your organization. So that can be a part of the why, right? These are also some sample why statements just to get those in front of you. Thinking about Korn Ferry and Deloitte also have several articles. Absolutely recommend. I think there's one on creating strategy this month, says Roma. Yes. Yeah, they do have a good strategy article this month as well. So no shortage of content. And as you can see, again, a little bit more of a verbose version, a more concise statement. In interest of being concise with time, I'll just share the concise one. Diversity makes us stronger. We grow with a culture of belonging, with safe places to learn and grow, capitalizing on all of our collective strengths. The idea behind this statement is you want it to evoke emotion. You want people to get excited about this. You want people to personally connect with this. So the what and the why really live together. A lot of my organizations are like, well, what do I do with these statements? What do I do with this language? Ideally, it would live inside anything else you're doing inside your culture, right? So with D&I, we want it to be embedded, infused into the culture. So it doesn't feel like something extra that we're doing, like an initiative. It's how we do business, right? So this might be, I have a lot of organizations that have a diversity page of their website or a people page of their website. These would be great illustrations of this is what we mean by this. This is how we're committed to this. And this, the how piece is really important because this is how we live it ongoing. So these aren't just statements that get thrown up on our website in some corporate statement. These actually get lived with the how. So in the interest of time, I'm just going to jump ahead to the how so you can ask any questions here in a minute. These are the most popular here. So I call it a roadmap. Roadmap of inclusions generally include some of these things, not all, but again, think about your culture, think about the resources that you have, think about your community and what makes sense. But in community engagement, right? I had a client that I just talked to this morning that's going to seek out a pro bono client that has diverse representation in the community. Right? That's a way that they can help. Maybe it's a Black-owned business, a woman-owned business, whatever that is, but that's the way that they want to engage with the community, and a mentorship program for underprivileged children as well in their community. Examples there. Training. This is 80% of the how is training. So this is, what are the skill gaps we have? And I have an inclusive leadership checklist that y'all can check out on my website. Like, it goes through the inventory of what are we missing? Do people not have candid conversations? Are managers not talking about this? Do we not have performance review processes consistent with DEI? Many of those things are often missing. We got to train people on those things. They just don't know what they don't know. Having a committee, I think, is great. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. It doesn't work everywhere. Having your leadership team engaged in this is a must-have, though, regardless. And marketing and other programs. So just some sample ideas to consider that you kind of want to put in your toolkit. This is the checklist I was referencing. So as you're thinking about building out the how, and education and awareness being a part of that, think about where people are most challenged in your organization. You know, it might be creating space for others. It might be we don't have some of these sustainable systems. It might be unconscious bias as a big blocker in how we evaluate performance. Or maybe we're not training our leaders how to be inclusive. Choose your own adventure. Start where you're at. Think about it as we're at point A. We want to be at point B. Okay. How do we get there? What are the skill gaps we need to close to get there? Other opportunities to consider. This is an assessment that I do with organizations to tee up the DEI strategy conversation. So I ask them 20 questions. Do we consistently define it? Which usually is why we're doing this session. So it's usually a low score. Usually also we're not measuring it. That's a big opportunity. We usually don't have exit interviews about it. We usually don't involve it in our performance review process or train on it. You know, some things we might be doing well. So it's kind of a pat the back exercise. Okay, we have some strengths, right? We're not starting from ground zero, but we also have some opportunities, right? So you can kind of prioritize these as opportunities. Last thing I want to share with you, the last question I ask in the DEI strategy conversation is, what things do we want to do to support DEI? And right now I'm talking Q4 and then 2021. It's kind of a fun conversation. Again, 2 examples of clients I've worked with this summer that prioritize just 3 things. I usually have them pick 3. This organization resisted and picked 5, which we'll see how many they do. But they wanted to do the DEI assessments. They're assessing where we're at, they're measuring it, and they're defining it. Those are pretty doable in the next few months. Then by 2021, we want to talk about how we're interviewing and hiring, how we're training people. Interviews are riddled with bias, and how we're hiring. So resisting the urge to first start, we're going to recruit diverse talent. That is not a good first step unless you have an inclusive workplace. So rather than starting there, they're going to build a culture of inclusion so that diversity feels welcomed in that inclusive culture. See how this works? And it's going to be much more effective. The organization I just worked with, actually, so we built out their DEI strategy. They started communicating, working the how pieces, and they just hired a gender non-binary person and a person of color. 2 out of the 4 people they just hired were of diverse groups. And I said to them, that doesn't just happen miraculously. That happens with intentionality, right? But they weren't doing it for that. They had built the strategy first. And I truly think there's a serendipitous effect that happens when you build out the strategy and when you do the hard work up front. So another example here, and I'll PDF these slides to y'all since we're kind of out of time here. That is all the content I had for you. We just have a couple of minutes. What I'd love to hear from everybody is any questions that you have that I have not answered. I know it was a lot of content. 2, I'd love, before everyone left, just to put one thing they can take away from this conversation today. You've got the workbook. It has a commitments page. Just jot down like one thing you will do with the conversation we've had today. And feel free to join on the chat there. Everyone also had the opportunity to introduce themselves. So I highly recommend connect with other folks, write down their name, connect with them on LinkedIn, ask people like, oh, what are you doing? Can we compare notes on our strategies? You don't have to go at this alone. I, of course, am here for you as well. Y'all have my contact information. So lots of different tools you can do. But my intent today was to arm you with the process, have an understanding of the process, how it works, the questions to ask, some examples to kind of model and follow, and really just be equipped to start having more of these conversations in your organization. It's not an overnight fix. These things take time. So if you feel overwhelmed, that's totally normal. And I would just encourage you to pick one thing that you can do with what we learned. So Christina shared bringing people into the conversation around the what and the why. That's good. Kirsten, why? The how will follow. The why has to be clear. And I think that's where you can really get some compelling information. I had a client that did a book. They read a book together as a leadership team this summer. I mean, you can pick so many books out there. They picked, so you want to talk about race as a leadership team. And they said, 80% white male leadership team. They said, oh my gosh, I had no idea this was going on and we've got to do better. And they came to this DEI strategy conversation so much more engaged and equipped to have a robust dialogue about this, but they found their why in reading something. So sometimes you can pepper in content, podcasts, books. There's no shortage of content, especially about racism right now, to kind of get people caught up or on the same page around it. Other thoughts, other commitments, takeaways, questions? I know we're at the top of the hour, so I want to honor everyone's time. My call to action to you is think about what this means to your organization, why it matters, and the how piece will come with time. I almost always wait on the how until we have a good crystal understanding of the what and the why, because the how is actually really easy to build out. It's like, oh, well, of course we need to do these things. We tend to start there and then not get them done or not get the momentum, not get the resourcing. Our business gets busy and we go back to the old way of doing things. So resist the urge to jump into the how. It's probably going to feel good to do some of the how checkboxing, but the what and the why are really, really important foundationally. So thanks so much, everybody, for the session today. I've enjoyed being with you. Stay in touch. For those of you who don't know, I'm having a baby, hopefully not this week, hopefully not next week, but sometime in the very near future. So if I don't hear from you, or you don't hear back from me quickly, that is why in October, but I'll be back in action November 9th. So if you want to schedule some time to talk about this or get some time with your team, I'm happy to do that when I'm back and in the office after November 9th. So I wish you well. Thank you for joining me. Good luck on your DEI journey, and I'll get all the materials to you later today. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, everyone.